Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream.
And I'm Ahmed Shabaddin, in for Malika Bilal. Are psychedelics the new wonder drugs?
Today we ask our guests about the benefits of hallucinogenics, so tweet us at AJ Stream, or you can leave a comment in our YouTube chat, and you too could be in the stream.
What can be more interesting than understanding better how we are the way we are? Inside the brain is the next great mystery, even more than space, really.
In recent years, researchers have been studying the potential benefits of microdosing psychedelic drugs such as LSD and MDMA, also known as ecstasy, as treatments for PTSD, schizophrenia, and depression associated with cancer treatment. Last year, the US Food and Drug Administration approved the use of an ingredient found in magic mushrooms for a drug trial aimed at treating depression. Opponents, though, say the research on psychedelics is too new and limited to be reliable.
Well, joining us to discuss all this in New York, Dr. Will Siu. He's a psychiatrist trained in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and provides ketamine-facilitated psychotherapy as part of his private practice. In Brooklyn, New York journalist, well, not New York journalist, in Brooklyn, New York, I should specify, journalist and author Nicholas Powers. His book, The Ground Below Zero, details his own personal experiences with psychedelics. And in Davis, California, Davis Olson, he's an assistant professor of chemistry, biochemistry, and molecular medicine at the University of California, Davis. And in Santa Cruz, California, Bera Yazar Klozinski, she's the director of research, development, and regulatory affairs at the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS. Lots of acronyms, lots of words there, but very welcome to all of you.
It's good to have you here, everybody. Our studio has a psychedelic feel to it, but Nicholas, I know that you take recreational drugs, you have taken hallucinogenics. Pick one of your choice, and can you describe the experience of that? Does it feel like this or something else?
Well, that's a huge compliment. So yes, taking the drug that I will choose is LSD. And the experience of taking it is feeling your thoughts and your ego dissolve and feeling emotionally open to the people around you and also to the sensory input around you. So if you're in front of a speaker at a party, you can feel the vibrations of the sound seem to reach your bones and even into your soul. You look at people's faces and you can almost dive into the emotions like a swimmer going into a pool. And if you are going through an emotionally hard time, you can experience those emotions very vividly and possibly work through them. And at the end of the trip, feel like a much more integrated, whole, and compassionate person because you've gone through that. So those are just one personal example. And I'm sure there's many others that people could talk about.
Dr. Will, am I asking the right question about the experience of taking a hallucinogenic? What else do you feel? Would it be the same every time?
Well, we use this term set and setting, depending where a person is when they take something internally and where they are, physically outside of themselves. So I think of, psychedelics as they've been coming into the mainstream, have really been looking at the medical use of them, right? So it's a little different than saying, are we focusing on the imagery and what we're seeing around us, as opposed to if we're sitting in a therapist's office with an eye mask and music. It's going to be a very different experience.
And I'm just curious, when you talk about that, I mean, we've seen this before in history. We have a comment from Amir saying, if I recall correctly, research on psychedelics was once hip in the mid-20th century, then uncool, and supposedly now moving back into the mainstream. What's behind the fluctuation in popularity? I mean, here we are having this conversation, but Doctor, you just mentioned that it's now in the mainstream, sort of. What do you attribute that to?
I attribute that to us being really in a place and time, especially in the Western world, where we are suffering tremendously personally from mental illness, from depression, from anxiety, and we don't have solutions, even though pharmacology, meaning medications, promised psychiatry in a way in the 90s that this is going to be a revolution, and it's been failing us. And then I think that is reflected, the unhealthy mental health state of the Western world is reflected in our politics. We're seeing things get more violent, both nationally and abroad. And I think because we're hungry for real solutions is why we really see psychedelics being as popular and getting as much attention as they are getting, because we have not seen results in psychiatry that have shown anything near what psychedelics are helping people with.
Vera,
I can shed a little bit of light on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can shed a little bit of light on that,
Please.
actually. So I think that hunger for a better world was present back in the 60s as well. But really what changed was in 1992, there was a really critical meeting at FDA where they agreed to treat psychedelics just like any other novel medicine that was being developed for through clinical trials, and the FDA allowed these trials to happen through their pilot programs group. And so,
and for international viewers, that's the Food and Drug Administration in the United States.
Right. And just to be clear, like the U.S. has a huge impact globally on the drug war and drug policies, and had been enforcing the drug war globally. Up until that point. And so it only makes sense that the ability to do this research would have to come from the U.S. and be allowed within the U.S. In order to actually happen.
David, you're the chemist in our conversation, and we asked you if you would help us out visualize what is happening in your brain. So you sent us a couple of pictures about what is happening in your brain when you are taking a hallucinogenic. Picture number one, I'll wait for you to see it on Skype, and then you can tell us what is happening here and then what is happening here.
Sure. So what you're looking at are tracings of neurons that were either treated with the controlled substance, which is the VEH, and neurons treated with a psychedelic compound known as N,N-dimethyltryptamine, abbreviated DMT. And what our research group has found is that psychedelic compounds tend to promote the growth of neurons in a very important part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
And the prefrontal cortex has a critical role in regulating fear and mood and reward.
So more neurons is a better thing for the brain and the well-being of us than fewer neurons?
So it's not actually the number of neurons. It's really the ability of these neurons to connect to each other and to communicate with other regions of the brain.
We have a lot of comments about this, people talking about their personal experiences with some of these substances, but also some questions, Femi. Barbara Smith saying, in the right setting with a non-intrusive guide for safety, the psychedelic drugs are useful for anxiety, depression, PTSD, and terminally ill patients, and even those who are just stuck. And, Nicholas, when you spoke earlier, you talked about dissolving the ego. We hear Barbara talk about being stuck. A lot of people who've battled mental illness, who are writing us, talk about this idea of being stuck. Is it true, as Horace is suggesting, that shrooms has the potential of permanently altering one's brain chemistry? And is that why you get unstuck, if you will?
I can address the question of being stuck more than the chemistry question, but just to give you one example from my life, the most powerful psychedelic experience that I had was in 2002, and it was the year after 9/11. So I was in New York. I was born in New York. I came back, and a month later, the towers fell. So then I went to an art festival, and my body was very traumatized. The anger, the fear, even the guilt and the rage, all of it was coiled up inside. And when I went to the festival, I met someone also from New York who gave me some psychedelics. And when I took them, I felt all of that anger, all of that rage, all of that fear getting unstuck from my body and flowing out. And when I came back to the city, I could feel how much more loose and open I was compared to the other New Yorkers who were still kind of living in the shadow of the towers. So that's just one experience out of many others. But
yeah. So from a chemistry perspective,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that what happens there is that you're having this subjective experience of something is changing in your brain. So that feeling of stuckness is essentially your neurons tend to signal in specific circuits. Certain regions of your brain communicate with other regions preferentially. And so it can lead to this feeling of being stuck or in a rut. And with psychedelics, as also is described in Michael Pollan's book, it's almost like you have this powdery, fresh slope to ski down and make new pathways, forge new connections between your neurons. And this is particularly why Dr. Olson's work is so powerful, because it is the first time we've seen direct evidence of this.
So, David,
Yeah,
what
I
do
do
you
wanna-
know?
Sorry, can I say
yeah,
for
you go first. I'll go second. You go first.
Is that, because when you ask the question about do shrooms get you unstuck? One thing that I try to emphasize to people, whether it's my colleagues or patients, is that, it's not just the shrooms, it's not just the substance. People have been taking these alone, and it's also not just the psychotherapy, right? Psychotherapy has also been around for a long time. It's the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy or MDMA assisted psychotherapy, both things combined, that are really being helpful to people, because I think it's an important thing, and it's an approach of combining a medicine during psychotherapy that is new and novel to psychiatry.
Okay, so what I want to know is, what do we know for sure, absolutely certain, that happens to the brain? And in terms of therapy, how do you connect those two things? David, I know you and your lab have been working on this. Tell us about one of the research and studies that either give weight to psychedelics helping us, or maybe take weight away from it.
So, I wish I could tell you that we know exactly how these substances work, but we simply do not. We need a lot more research. I can tell you about, I think, one of the prevailing hypotheses in the field. And if you look at the structure of the brain for people who are depressed or have a related neuropsychiatric disease, you see this atrophy of neurons in the prefrontal cortex. Now, pretty much every antidepressant that we know of tends to regrow these neurons. They just do it on a time scale that correlates with their efficacy in the clinic. So slow-acting antidepressants tend to regrow neurons more slowly. Something like ketamine rapidly regrows these connections, and what we've found lately is that classic serotonergic psychedelics like LSD or dimethyltryptamine produce a very similar effect as ketamine in terms of neural structure.
Is ketamine a good description for that? Is that a medication that is put into anesthesia? Does it kind of dampen your feelings? What's a better description of ketamine?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Give us a layman's description of ketamine, David.
So ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. It's used in veterinary medicine and in people as well.
Okay.
But recently,
a tranquilizer, is that too heavy-handed for me to say it's a tranquilizer?
So at high doses, you could use that, but that term. But at low doses, which is what's typically used for depression, the FDA actually just recently approved it as a treatment, a potential treatment for treatment-resistant depression.
All right.
And a lot of people writing us, Femi, are talking about trauma. We've talked about the ego, we've talked about trauma, we've talked about depression, PTSD, but I'm curious, Bera, Horace is saying, personally, even though I haven't tried any before, though I would love to, I feel psychedelics have the potential of deepening our understanding of human consciousness. Now, I know we haven't said that we understand exactly what these substances do and why there are trials, but is that ring true with you, based on what you know?
Yeah, we have a lot of exploratory data that we collect, in addition to just, the level of severity of PTSD or trauma symptoms. And these definitely support what he's saying, in that people feel more self-compassion. They go through an experience of an altered or non-ordinary state of consciousness during the effect of the psychedelic itself. But then afterwards, they're able to take away new meaning in their own lives. And this is particularly where, Will was talking about the psychotherapy really supporting and promoting this. And so the psychotherapy actually helps to reinforce what's learned and makes it more durable and long lasting. And we have data going out for most studies at 12 months later. And in one study, we have data going out an average of 3.5 years later, where people literally report feeling very similarly to how they did at the end of the study. So that durable improvement with only, between 1 and 3 exposures to a drug itself is really powerful. And the only reason it's able to do that is because of the psychotherapy paradigm, which activates learning and memory based mechanisms in the brain. And this is what's shown to be required for the neuroplasticity that Dr. Olson has been showing in animals and in, petri dish experiments.
So I want to show, Dr.
Actually, can I say something?
I want to show people how this actually works in a therapy setting, because they may be having all sorts of imagery about how do you use this in therapy. So this is from the organisation that Bearer is part of, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and this is how hallucinogenics are given like little doses and it builds up over time. But in this kind of setting, Dr. Will, I know you've tried hallucinogenics too, and how has it helped you?
Yeah, so that was what I wanted to share is, yes, I mean, I am both a medical doctor and I have a PhD in basic, in a laboratory science. And at the same time, though, I spent 4.5 years doing psychotherapy 3 to 4 times a week to try to really help myself. It was tremendously valuable, but around that time, I actually got a chance to use MDMA in a therapeutic setting legally with MAPS. And there was a piece of loneliness that had sat with me since the age of like 9 from childhood physical trauma that I was finally able to work through, not just during the MDMA experience. I think the MDMA experience allows us to access old memories, old emotions, and that's when we talk about it altering consciousness or giving access to non-ordinary states of consciousness. But it was really in the weeks after of continued psychotherapy that I was able to really come to peace at that. And for the first time, that was at the age of 37. From 9 to 37, I had felt loneliness almost every single day of my life to the point of suicide sometimes. And within a month of taking MDMA in that setting, I was free from that. And I can say 2 years later, I don't suffer from that anymore.
If I can interject, I mean, you talking about loneliness and some of these emotions, obviously, that anyone feels and can relate to, either when they're depressed or when the ego takes too much control of decision-making, let's say. At least that's my personal experience. But we also have another grad student who could relate to what you said, Doctor, and what you laid out there. Her name's Erica Avey. Take a listen to her experience.
Microdosing helped me become more comfortable just being in the world and getting out into the world and appreciating life again. And as someone who deals with depression and mood swings, that's a pretty radical change. Before the microdosing regimen, I could spend days in my apartment bailing on work, bailing on friends, not even functioning. And that doesn't happen anymore. I think microdosing helped me become more aware of my thoughts, my feelings, my body, my surroundings, and become better at taking care of myself. I don't think the drug itself cured me of my depression in the long run, and I don't think any drug could. But I think it helped me implement all the daily little things I can do to stay balanced.
David, hearing that, what comes to mind? I mean, does that resonate with you? Because Elizabeth Rainey is asking flat out, we have a lot of people commenting on this topic on YouTube saying, can psychedelics be the alternative to some of those traditional medicines we all know, Prozac, Valium, and other antidepressants? So
the difference between, psychedelics and something like Prozac is that you can take Prozac home with you and put it in your medicine cabinet. The issue with psychedelics is that they're Schedule I compounds and they're currently illegal. And so due to the perceptual changes when you take a hallucinogen, they also probably should be administered under the care of a doctor. And so I think that they offer an incredible potential as a therapeutic in the clinic. But I think that we need a lot more research before we get to that point.
Dr. Will, go ahead.
Add to that in terms of the safety, because it's not really a requirement that they have to be given by a doctor. I can speak to some of the side effects that we've observed in our data, and it's things like, some anxiousness, depressive symptoms. These are things that people already have when they come to the studies. It's just that in some cases they may be slightly exacerbated. And the other side, potential side effects that we see are like dizziness, some nausea, fatigue, muscle tightness. And so these are not safety concerns at the level that would require, ongoing direct oversight by a doctor. It's really the psychotherapy that's really needed. And so we need qualified psychotherapists like Dr. Xu that, have been really trained in how to deliver this, knowing what they know about the medicine itself and using that as a tool to enhance the psychotherapy. So yes, I agree with you. They're not going to be take-home medicines because the psychotherapy is really what is making them have lasting and durable effects.
Nicholas, yes, go ahead.
Do you mind if I just comment on that?
Yeah, please do. Go ahead, David.
I agree that the psychotherapy could definitely enhance the effects, but Some of our results suggest that even without psychotherapy, in rodent models, these compounds have beneficial effects on their own. A compound like MDMA that doesn't produce robust hallucinations like a compound such as LSD, it's going to have a very different safety kind of profile. But if you're producing really drastic changes in perception, usually while you're under that experience, you should be in a supportive setting to help you overcome anything. And so the fact that you have to be in a doctor's office for that is adds an additional cost to it, as opposed to something that you could take home. Put in your
definitely adds to the cost of the treatment, but I also think that with this increase in neuroplasticity, what we're really seeing is environments and context dependent effects as well. So this is why I think we see pretty marked differences between use in recreational settings where people might be not sleeping, they're probably staying up all night, overheating. All these things actually, activate similar pathways and then can lead to safety concerns. But if it's in a controlled setting, like you're saying, Dr. Olson, then I think the risks are really manageable.
Okay.
And so that's why.
We're almost running out of time here, so I want to share this with you. This is a headline that comes from Australia in the last few weeks. A new era of psychology, Australian first psychedelic drug trial could change how we treat mental illness. Again, it's a very small study, but I'm wondering, Dr. Well, if there are other places around the world where you can see they're making progress in terms of psychedelic drugs and using them in therapy.
You're saying Barra could probably speak more to that in terms of, I know there are active studies in Europe, in Australia. I shall probably let Barra take care of that question. She knows better.
Yeah, actually, we're actively pursuing approval with FDA in Israel, in Canada, in 7 different countries in Europe, including the UK, which may no longer be Europe anymore after a while.
We have transitioned into another topic, Vera.
Yes, I know. And we're also supporting studies in
You've
South
given
America.
me anxiety.
Sorry about that. You should have a sip of tea.
I will.
So, Vera, quick question. When you bring up those countries, many people think of Jamaica as the land where cannabis and marijuana is legal. In fact, it is illegal. But what is legal in Jamaica is some of these psychedelics, like magic mushrooms, which contains that ingredient we've been discussing. Let's listen to Eric and what's going on in Treasure Beach in Jamaica.
My name is Eric Osborne. I am host of the Psilocybin Chronicles podcast and founder and CEO of Michael Meditations, a legal psilocybin retreat center in Treasure Beach, Jamaica. In the last 3 years, we've worked with over 500 clients suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, crippling anxiety, treatment-resistant depression, or facing their own mortality. In nearly every single case, we have seen massive improvements in the quality of the individual's life. Clearly, psilocybin mushrooms are a powerful medicine.
Nicholas, you started us off with an example of an experience that you've had and explained to us how psychedelics work for you. Mm-hmm. If you were talking to our audience and you were just ending the conversation, what would you say the benefits were from a casual user?
The psychedelics help put the different parts of one's psyche together. They can also actually help a family together. Oftentimes families are driven apart by secret or shame. Youth do drugs or experiment. They don't tell the elders in their family. The elders may be afraid of getting older and of their mortality, but they're not telling the people who are younger in their family. And I think that psychedelics, when talked about more openly, even within families, can actually create more unity, more love, and more support. And I think that could change a culture, not just in a family, but in a neighborhood and in a nation.
Thank you. You all helped us talk about psychedelics more openly. We're at the end of the show. Dr. Will, there's no actually, because I'm at the end of the show. The news is coming up very fast. Dr. Will, actually, thank you very much. Nicholas and David and Vera, that was actually an interesting conversation.
It was.
Right.
It was.
Dr. Will, we'll see you online. To be continued. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.